My name is Ali Hussein Kasim. I'm the founding chairman of the Association of Fintechs in Kenya and also a vice president of the Africa Fintech Network. The Association of Fintechs in Kenya, it's a membership of an organization of about 100 fintechs within Kenya, and we have seen tremendous growth in fintech. I think the best I can give you as an example, financial technology. It started with the likes of Craft Silicon, Eclectics, M-Pesa. These are some of our big fintechs in Kenya, Cellulant, PesaPal, and we have seen tremendous growth. Now, when you're talking about fintech, we're not just talking about payments. We're talking about wealth tech, that's wealth management. We're talking about blockchain, crypto. We are talking about regulation technology, reg tech. We are talking about insure tech. So the fintech ecosystem in Kenya and Africa in general has really, really grown. But we are just starting to scratch the surface. Only about 10% of payments across Africa are digital payments. So they are obviously big players, but when we are talking about how the growth is happening, we must take that into consideration. We must take into consideration that we're just starting the journey. Africa has 1.4 billion people. Depending on who you ask, let's say 1.3 billion, 1.4 billion people. Only 10% of that population engages in digital payments. So you can just imagine the immense potential. Now, the players in the fintech ecosystem fintechs of course, includes banks, include policymakers and regulators who we must continuously engage. It includes large payment platforms like MasterCard and Visa, Alipay. It includes wealth management players. It includes insurance companies that are now becoming more and more engaged in insure tech, which is basically tech-enabled insurance. The continuous engagement between policymakers, regulators, and the fintech ecosystem needs to be something that is taken to the next notch. That's not to say that there isn't any engagement. I think we've seen tremendous improvement in that engagement between policymakers, regulators, and the fintech ecosystem. What is important is to ensure that there's a lot more seamless engagement between these two key players in the financial technology ecosystem, not just in Kenya, but across Africa. I think one of the biggest impediments for me is an issue around communication. So we must start bridging that communication gap between players. What we're also seeing is that our partners in the banking sector are helping to bridge that gap. They've launched platforms like banking as a service to enable fintechs to plug into the financial technology sector. To my colleagues in the fintech ecosystem, is for us to understand one key thing. Financial services is one of the most regulated industries in the world. So to expect that it will be different in Africa is to expect the impossible. The thing about this is, how do we bridge that gap? How do we bridge the gap between expectations of fintech entrepreneurs and expectations of policymakers and regulators? And that's why associations like the Association of Fintechs in Kenya and the Africa Fintech Network, which is an umbrella body of 40 national fintechs across Africa, becomes increasingly important, because it's at that level that we are starting to engage policymakers at a Pan-African level. And the journey is just starting. But what I want to say is this: Africa in general, and Kenya in particular, is open for business as far as fintech is concerned. Regulation and policy is something that we must take for granted. It used to be three things that are a given in the world today: life, taxes, and death. Today you must add regulation on top of it. And at the risk of repeating myself, first you must have engagement. Impact is the fact that you will have slower growth, but the fact of the matter is we all must play in this ecosystem. We all must adhere to the policy and regulatory frameworks when it comes to financial services. For a long time, we in the fintech ecosystem thought we were only dealing with technology. We have now realized that the fin in the fintech must also be taken into consideration, and we must give it the presence and the attention that it requires. For you not to adhere to policy and regulatory mandates of regulators and policymakers in Africa when it comes to financial services, it just means you'll not do business. It's as simple as that. There's no other way to put it. You must adhere to. And for you to also play, you must have the policy, you must have the licenses to be able to pay. So there are quite a number of licenses across Africa. In Kenya, you're talking about the payment service provider licenses for payment players. You have the wealth tech licenses from the Capital Markets Authority. You have the digital credit providers license from the Central Bank of Kenya. You have the InsurTech licenses from the Insurance Regulatory Authority. You then must also adhere to the basic licenses and regulations of doing business. You have the data protection law in this country that you must also adhere to. We are facing a plethora of regulatory requirements like any other business, but to also re-emphasize, again, we are playing in the financial services ecosystem. Financial services is the most regulated for obvious reasons. You're dealing with other people's money. So the government must ensure that the players who are playing in that ecosystem are fit and proper.